Hi, this is the Peaceful Prepper. Today I want to talk about water filtration and purification, part 3 of my Emergency Water for Urban Preppers series. I'm in the process of figuring out what I actually might need in an emergency for water purification. This is one of those topics that I feel I really don't know enough to make an educated choice between products, and it's an important choice. If I have a flashlight that isn't very bright, it's not that big a deal in an emergency. But if the method I use to purify water isn't effective, that is a big deal. And it seemed that every filter I looked at online or heard about on YouTube claimed to be the newest technology, better than anything on the market, etc., etc. And that just makes it even more confusing. So my videos are always just my thoughts and opinions, but with this topic I particularly want to emphasize that I'm sharing my current understanding of the issues. I've been trying to do some research. I'm not recommending a particular filter or brand. I've tried to be as accurate as I can in reporting on the research that I've been doing, but I don't have a science background at all. And anything I say that you find useful, you should confirm for yourself. So I've included some links below to get you started if you are interested in looking at some research. A lot of them are to the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, or the EPA, the Environmental Protection Association or agency, as well as the company websites whose products I'm discussing. The specific information about each filter came from their websites, and hopefully I've sorted out some of the factual information that they provide versus the marketing that they offer. Not that I blame them for marketing. It probably isn't too effective to try to sell a product by saying, well, this is a pretty good product. We're good people. It should work out for you. It's as good as anything else out there. Why don't you buy it? That may not be as effective as saying it's the best ever. So many of you probably have a lot more extensive knowledge and experience about this topic, and I really welcome comments and corrections so that we all get the most accurate information possible. It seemed logical to think about what kind of water contaminants were a concern before trying to figure out how I'd filter them out. For myself, it just made sense to put them in 4 categories, although some websites do 5 or 6. This seemed to work for my purposes. Turbidity, the suspended solids, that's just dirt in the water, and that's not something I'm going to talk a lot about. It's pretty straightforward to filter out using a cloth, a coffee filter. A lot of filters have their own pre-filters to deal with that. The next section, biological, which includes the cysts, the bacteria, the viruses, it seems that most of the time when we're talking about clean emergency water, it's the biological contaminants that people are talking about getting out of the water. Even worldwide, when they're talking about access to clean water, this is usually what they're talking about filtering out of the water. And it makes sense because it's these contaminants that cause the intestinal illnesses, diarrhea, some of the more immediate, potentially life-threatening illnesses in an emergency are biological. I also think that there are other contaminants that are in the water and could also increase in an emergency if there's flooding, industrial accidents, things like that. So the chemicals, the heavy metals, and then the radiological contaminants, how to get radioactive particles out of water to make it safe to drink. And it seems that since the accident at Fukushima after the tsunami in Japan in 2011, there's more discussion, or online I could find more articles on portable radiological filters. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. It's an area that I don't understand as well, but I'll share what I have. Then I wanted to think about what contaminants I was most likely to encounter in an emergency. And if you've seen my video Beyond 2-liter bottles, these levels may look familiar, but feel free to ignore them. What's important is the water source. And stored tap water, if the containers weren't clean, there might be some bacteria if they haven't been rotated. If they've been in the sun, the plastic could leach into it a little bit, but it's pretty straightforward, as are hot water heaters, toilet tanks. With rainwater, I think it's important to remember, in addition to any bacteria or things that might normally be in the rain, also algae can collect in, if you have a rainwater barrel, algae can grow in that as well. But anything that's in the air can be brought down in the rain. So if there's been some kind of chemical spill or um, nuclear accident and things were released into the air, you can expect, or at least you should consider the possibility that the rainwater has an increase in those kinds of contaminants. And the same would be true for river and pond water, any outside source of water. Not only will receive toxins from the rain, but any kind of flooding that might bring more sewage, more industrial waste than normal. And this seems to be particularly likely to happen in an emergency. Two of the most effective types of systems I'm not even going to talk about: distillation and reverse osmosis. Because what I'm interested in is a water filter for my emergency kit. I'm not going to be using it for daily life or keep it out on the counter. I want something that's small and portable and relatively inexpensive. Reverse osmosis systems can be very expensive, and I don't believe they're small and portable. Distillation requires boiling and capturing steam, so usually fuel and electricity, although a solar still can also be used for that. And I believe both these systems can be an effective part of desalination to make seawater drinkable. I also want to say there are a lot of, I believe, very effective ways to make filters and distillers on your own. But again, size and portability doesn't usually go along with that. And I don't have the knowledge to do something like that, although I enjoy watching videos and learning about it. Now may also be a good time to mention that the term filter and purification have specific technical meanings when they're applied to biological contaminants. I think primarily the difference is that purification will deal with viruses, and filters do not. But I'm probably going to use them interchangeably just because that's what I'm used to. But I will be trying to be specific about what is being removed from the water when I talk about a filter. These are the categories of filters that just made sense to me as I was trying to understand them. Again, this is not some kind of official or universal list. The chemical purifiers are the tablets and liquids that you can add to water to kill all kinds of biological bacteria and viruses. Chlorine, iodine, and chlorine dioxide is the chemical that's in Katadyn's, MicroPure tablets, that kind of thing. Those are the most common, but I believe there are others. And I've put a lot of different things into this category microfilter that I'm not sure that's even the correct term, but in my head at least, it's the kinds of filters that talk about how small the particles are that they're able to filter out. They often talk about the micron level, and one thing I learned that is helpful if you're doing your own research is there's a difference between absolute micron level and the nominal micron level. The absolute one tells you a lot, and the nominal I don't believe does so much. So if the website doesn't report whether it's an absolute level or a nominal one, it's just a question to ask. It doesn't mean that it's not absolute, but it's worth being open-minded about all the information and seeing if it makes sense. So this is a very simplified chart about types of filters and their usual applications, or what they're most effective at. And I hope it's not so oversimplified that the information is no longer useful or accurate, but it made sense to me, and I found it helpful to guide the kinds of questions that I would ask when I was trying to learn about a filter. So for instance, you can see a lot of filters deal with biological, except for carbon. That's not very effective at dealing with biologicals. So if a filter says that it's mostly carbon-based and they're claiming to deal with viruses, you know something is probably up. There may be some technology that they're using, but it's worth asking a second question or looking at it a little bit more closely. And again, something that is just a filter, if they're saying that they can reduce chemicals or heavy metals, if they don't have some other component in there, or at least chemicals, heavy metals, I guess filters sometimes can, it's worth looking in and seeing why, because that's not typically the most effective use of that kind of filter. So that's how I used this as I was doing my research. I was least effective at understanding how radiological filters worked, although they were clear that what they're doing, the water itself isn't radioactive. What they're doing is removing radioactive particles from the water. So in that case, it makes sense that the most useful kinds of filter would be either carbon-based or a microfilter. But again, this is an area that I found less information, and I found the information harder to understand. So that's the warning about that. Since biological contamination is really critical to safeguard against, and emergency recommendations usually focus on boiling water and chlorine, even though they actually do nothing for other kinds of contamination, I really wanted to understand this category better. And you can see why boiling is the gold standard. It is really highly efficient in getting rid of protozoa like Cryptosporidium and Giardia, and bacteria and viruses. And ultraviolet light is the same. Although with ultraviolet light, you have to be careful that the water is very clear, because I guess if there are any other particles in the water, they can almost create shade for the biological contaminants, and the ultraviolet light won't have a chance to get at them. The chemical purifiers, you can see, are very effective with bacteria and viruses, and less so with protozoa, although the chlorine dioxide a little bit more. And filters, microfilters are the opposite, which makes sense because protozoa are the largest particle of these, bacteria next, and viruses the smallest. So with the physical filters, you're going to have an easier time getting rid of protozoa than viruses. With the chemical, it's the opposite, so they do make a very good combination. And a lot of the products that are on the market aren't just one kind of filter, which is why they can do a wider range of things. There are 4 filters that I'm considering that meet my criteria of small, portable, and under $50. The Sawyer Mini, which is pictured there, is a hollow fiber membrane with an absolute micron level of 0.1. And this is the lightest and smallest of all the filters that I'm looking at. And I think it's one of the lightest and smallest on the market. Renovo Trio filter to the right has a pre-filter, hollow fiber membrane, and activated carbon. And they list 0.05 microns, half the size as the Sawyer, on the website. They actually aren't explicit there as to whether it's absolute or nominal, but based on the research they include, it seems likely that it's absolute, but I don't want to take anything for granted. Most of the filter websites do have a link to the actual reports from the lab testing that the filter does, and if you're really looking for a filter that you have more confidence in, it makes some sense to just check to see that's out there. I don't feel like I could read it in a very knowledgeable way, but it gives you something to look at and you see what they were specifically testing. Seychelles makes the only portable filter that I found that reduces radioactive particles. They have several types of filters. The one I'm looking at is called the Extreme, and it's a combination of what they call their radiological filter that reduces radiological, chemical, and heavy metal, and what they call their advanced filter, which purifies biological, including viruses, and reduces some chemical and heavy metal. And then the last on the left is the Berkey Sport Bottle, which uses the Berkey Black filter, which is another multimedia filter. And I found it a little bit hard to get a really clear understanding from the website because it has so many different elements. It includes microfiltration, ionic adsorption, and absorption, I think including some carbon. And I don't have enough background to really understand what that means, and it didn't really feel like it was written in the most straightforward way, but if I understood, maybe it is very straightforward. I also looked at 4 filters that I decided not to consider further. The Katadyn Hiker and the LifeStraw, which are both on the top, they both focus primarily on biologicals and filter down to zero point 0.2 microns. So they don't filter any viruses, and they only capture larger particles than either the Sawyer or the Renovo trio. The Katadyn is just over $50 on Amazon. Katadyn is a company that's been making filters for a long time. They have a really good reputation also for the durability of their filters, and it's a pump filter. The LifeStraw is closer to maybe $20, and it's getting a lot of press because the company also provides a year of clean water to a child who doesn't have it for every straw sold. So there are a lot of benefits to buying this kind of straw. It has a 5-year shelf life, and because I want to put this in an emergency kit, and hopefully it'll be there for longer than 5 years if we're lucky, I decided that the Sawyer Mini, which covered the same kinds of contaminants but a little bit more, made sense over these for this purpose. But these are both 2 really good products. The Aquamira filter, and I have a picture of the Frontier Pro here. I actually own the emergency straw. I actually have 2, one in my bug out bag or emergency kit and one I keep in my car. But as I did this research, it turns out they don't meet the EPA criteria for a water filter. And I didn't realize that when I bought them 2 years ago. They're very effective with the largest biological class, which is the Protozoa cis, but they only filter some bacteria and no viruses. They do reduce some chemicals. And as I looked more closely, they're made of activated coconut carbon. And if you think back to my little chart, carbon filters are not primarily biological filters. So if I'd realized that, I might have looked more closely before I bought them, because I did want something that filtered more than Protozoa when I bought them. On the website, they suggest that the straws be used with their purification tablets, and that makes sense because the tablets are less effective with Protozoa, but they are effective with bacteria and viruses. So, but only with the tablets are you protected from bacteria with this straw. And finally, the SteriPen, which is a UV purifier, it runs on batteries, and it's close to $50, their cheapest model. And because of running on batteries, I decided that storing it in an emergency kit and needing to rely on batteries just didn't make sense for me. But it's supposed to be a very effective biological purifier. So here are the 4 filters that I'm considering. The Sawyer Mini filter just focuses on biologicals. It does address some viruses because it goes to 0.1 micron, but no chemicals, heavy metals, anything like that. The Renovo Trio Star does deal with some chemicals and heavy metals, as does the Berkey Sport bottle, and the Seychelles Extreme also reduces radiological contaminants. There's a wide range for their filter life and their shelf life. I mean, the Sawyer Mini goes up to 100,000 gallons with just needing to backwash it. But it's also the simplest filter without the carbon component, which makes a difference in terms of the filter life. Since these are for emergency use, I'm less concerned about the filter life. And the shelf life, the shortest shelf life is the Renovo at 25 years. So that also seems like a absolutely reasonable range. The costs do vary somewhat, but all of them are under $50 for one. Actually, I think all of them are under $35 for one. I took these costs off of Amazon a couple of days ago just to have some consistency, because the websites have different costs. You have to sort of look around for the best price. And the Seychelles Extreme, Amazon only listed the bottle and they sold it in a 2-pack. So I just listed that price, but one of the bottles if you split up the 2-pack, was what, $31, $32. So I'm planning on keeping one of these in my car, and one in my bug out bag. And the one in my car I'll be using when I go hiking. The one in the bob will just sit there until it's needed. And of course, part of the decision is based on what's the easiest to use, especially with straws and filters. It can have a very different feel trying to suck the water in. So I'd love to hear if you have any personal experience with these filters, or know something that I didn't consider, or help clarify something in general. That kind of feedback is really appreciated. I've been looking at filters that are geared towards a single user, but there are other options using the same filters that we've been looking at that would be more useful for families and larger groups. And so I just have a couple of those examples if people are interested. On the left, Seychelles, using the same filters that we've been talking about, makes a pitcher that I believe holds a gallon of water. They also make that filter that will go into a 5-gallon jug of water. So for a group, that can be very useful. In the middle is the ubiquitous Berkeley countertop model that's all over YouTube. The Sawyer is attached to the 5-gallon bucket, and they have a accessory kit for their squeeze bottle, which is the same filter as the mini that I was looking at. And I believe the whole kit is, with the squeeze bottle, is about $50. I could be off on that. But it has an attachment for a faucet and a way to pipe it into a 5-gallon bucket and take water out that way. And above that is a gravity-based filter from LifeStraw. I think it might be called Family Life. It filters, I think, 2 liters at a time, but it has capacity to do maybe a gallon or 2 an hour, maybe more than that. Both the Family Life, the filter filters down to 0.02 microns, which is enough to claim to filter out or eliminate viruses and to count as a water purifier. The Sawyer, the squeeze Sawyer that is in the picture is like the mini, that it goes down to 0.1, but they also have another model that does go down like the Family Life to 0.02, which is enough to eliminate viruses. And I believe in terms of portable filters, 0.02 is the smallest certainly that I ran across. So those are all good options for larger groups. Another item for an emergency kit that I don't have any personal experience with are water testing kits. And I know there's several brands. I don't know how effective they're considered, but it could be very useful to either test the efficacy of a filter before an emergency, or to be able to identify contaminants in your water during an emergency so you know best how to treat it. So that's just an idea, something that I haven't researched yet. As I was finishing this video this weekend, Toledo, Ohio and the area around it have been dealing with contaminated tap water. They found levels of microcystic toxins in the treatment plant that seemed to come from specific algae in Lake Erie. The last I saw, no one had been infected, and I really hope that that continues. But it's causing chaos as people worry about getting drinking water. The stores sold out right away. So it's a really good example of how helpful it is to plan for a water emergency. Apparently, some toxins are also made worse by boiling. Toledo has not just a do not drink alert, but a do not boil alert. So the gold standard of purification, boiling, is still not a good idea all the time, and we really need to make sure we stay informed of what's happening in an emergency. Microcystic toxins are apparently made more concentrated when boiled. I don't quite understand all the dynamics of it, but it could really have tragic consequences if we automatically started boiling our tap water when we heard it was contaminated and didn't wait to take in all of the information. So I've included a couple links below if you're interested in finding out more. One is just to a news story, and one is to a page with information about the microcystic toxins. Again, this is The Peaceful Prepper. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was a long one. Whatever part you watched. I hope it was useful to you. Feedback and comments are always really appreciated. Be happy and be safe.